There's lots of different ways to tint a piece of footage in After Effects. In other words, add a color cast to it. You could use the tint or tritone effects. You could use the photo filter effect. You could use hue saturation and colorize mode. However, quite often I don't use an effect to add a color cast. Instead, I use a full frame block of color and then use blending modes to blend that color on top of my underlying footage. Let me show you this technique. Here's a piece of footage of a skateboarder performing a stunt. Bright day, blue sky. Let's say that instead we wanted to give more of a colorized look to this, more of a sunsetty feel, more of a tropical, colorful sort of look. Now instead of applying effect, instead I'm going to create a full frame piece of color to put over this footage. There's a couple ways of doing that. Some people may use Layer, New, Solid. The shortcut is Command Y on Mac, Control Y on Windows. Click the Make Comp Size button, choose your color in here, maybe something a bit more tropical and orange in tone. Click OK, click OK. Or a better way is to use shape layers, which were introduced in After Effects CS3. Now if you're afraid of shape layers, they're actually quite easy. I'll delete my solid for now, make sure I have no layer selected, make sure my rectangle tool is selected, and just double click it. It will create a full frame shape layer that is any color of my choice. I don't need a stroke, so I'll click on the word stroke and say off. I do want to fill, and for now I'll make it a solid color fill. So I'll click on the solid color option, and now I can click on the fill color swatch to choose what color I want it to be. Something maybe in that range. Back to our orange again. Okay, whether you use the solid or shape layer, start out with the mode Color. This will replace the color in all underlying layers with the color of the solid, but keep the luminosity, the grayscale variations of the clips underneath. Color, there. Now I have a very orange tropical scene. If I want to adjust the strength of this, I press T to reveal opacity, and then just back off its amount. So there's the original scene, and there's with a little bit of my tropical warming in it. If I want to change the color of that tint, this is where shape layers are much better than solids. I don't need to open solid settings and click on a color swatch and do all this stuff. I just click on the swatch right here and interactively start playing around with the color. Less saturated, more saturated, different hues, and immediately see what the effect is going to be of my different filters. Maybe something in the more purplish or pinkish sort of tone. There we go. Color is the basic way of adding a tint. But since you're using blending modes, you have a lot of different options. You can try different ideas, such as, say, overlay mode, or something in the way of a color burn, or a color dodge effect to create different treatments, different ways of tinting your footage. I'll go back to normal color mode for now. Now this is just a pure solid color over the whole scene. You can also color correct using gradients. If this was a solid layer, I would look for the ramp effect, which is a way of creating a gradient. But since this is a shape layer, I'll just change the mode to gradient. I can make it a radial gradient, or I can make it a linear gradient. Let's make it linear for now. Click OK. And now I just click on my fill color, which opens up a gradient editor. I can go ahead and pick what I want my first color to be, maybe something in a more of a goldy tone for those highlights we're talking about, and then pick what I want a second color to be. Let's say I want to fade off to maybe something a little bit cooler, something a bit in the blue zone, and let's bring up a little bit of saturation there. And click OK. To edit where my gradient starts and stops, I will twirl open my shape layer, twirl open contents, and select the rectangle. And now I have these two little controls here where I can say, where does my color start? And where does my color stop? I'll go ahead and increase the opacity so I can see the effect of my gradient here. Select rectangle again. Maybe I want it to fade from one corner of the shot to another corner of the shot. And there's a different look. Go ahead and edit my gradient interactively. Say I want that black to be something that's a much more obvious tint. Let's say that I want to change the bias between these two, either much more of my first color or much more of my second color. Or let's say I even want another color. Let's say an intermediate color such as something in the green zone, just to be a little crazy here. I'll pull the saturation out of that. Pull it down a little bit more towards this, and now I've got a bit more of a transition from gold to greenish tone to blue. Click OK, and start editing where the gradient falls off from there to there, back off the opacity amount, treat the scene how I want. If I don't like how strong the gradient is at the bottom, open up the gradient editor again, click one of the opacity stops and say, reduce the opacity of my gradient layer down to that second stop. And now you'll see that I'm fading to the natural concrete color, but keeping my tonal variation up top here. And I can even bias how that ramp falls off. Less color at the top, more color at the top. Click OK, and now I've got a gradient filter applied to this whole scene, before and after. And of course I can make them any colors and apply this to any footage. This is actually a more flexible way of tinting a layer than just using a tint, tritone, photo filter effect. You have more control over colors, gradients, directions of the gradients. You can use different blending modes such as overlay. It's basically a real power user approach towards adding gels or different sorts of tints to your scene.